so we are starting with chapter 8 today, looking at distortions of perception. So this is basically just building on what we learned in chapter 7 and basically trying to extend that knowledge a little bit. So before we start, I want you guys to look at this, this picture here and just take a few seconds to decide for yourself which line is the longest. Okay, so usually this is an example of a visual illusion, and a visual illusion is actually a type of perceptual distortion or distortion of perception. So usually when this question or this image is shown to people and they're asked, okay, which line is the longest? Most people will say that line B is the longest, or the second line in that image there. Okay, so this is actually a really famous illusion called the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Okay, the Mueller-Lyer illusion is basically this idea that depending on how a line is drawn, our brains can actually trick us into thinking that line is longer than the others, even though it isn't actually any longer in its actual length. Okay, so this is the line that most people believe is the longest out of the three. So this is one of the illusions we're going to look into a little bit today. Alrighty, so before we do that, we have to understand what is a visual illusion to begin with. So remember, I said a visual illusion is a type of perceptual distortion. And a distortion is usually some kind of misinterpretation, some kind of warped view or warped perspective, essentially. So a visual illusion is a consistent misinterpretation of real sensory information. So I showed you guys these three lines. This is real sensory information in the form of an image, in the form of some visual stimuli, okay? And people will consistently, misinterpret that line as being the longest, okay? Even when you tell them that, yes, this is not actually as long as the other lines, they'll be like, no, it actually is. It is longer. What are you talking about? So there's a consistent misinterpretation there. Okay, visual illusions are really kind of fun things because we always usually get fooled by them, and everyone sees a visual illusion differently. We looked at a few visual illusions in chapter 7 when I showed you guys, like, you know, the perceptual set and how we have different expectations when we look at certain optical illusions. And so visual illusions is the same thing. It's just a mismatch between our perception, so what we actually sense or what we see, versus what the actual physical reality of that image or what of that particular experience is. So two of the most famous visual illusions that we look at, especially in this chapter, are the Mueller-Lyer illusion, which is the illusion with the three lines and which one is the longest, and the Ames room illusions. The Ames room illusion is a really fun illusion as well, where one side of the room is shaped a little bit differently than the other side. So you might have actually seen this if you've ever gone to those kind of like theme parks or amusement venues where they have like a room and one person stands on one side and they look like a giant, and as they walk to the other side of the room, they become like a tiny person. So the Ames room illusion is basically what that is. So we're going to look at both of them today. So just before we look at those two specific visual illusions, I want you guys to just have a quick look at this slide here and just kind of look at these visual illusions. Okay, some of these we already covered. For example, we covered the duck or rabbit one last time in chapter 7. We covered the old lady looking away. The young lady looking away, or is it the old lady looking to the side? We covered that one as well in chapter 7. The other ones might be a little bit new. So whenever you look at this slide, or whenever I open up this slide, I have a consistent misinterpretation between what I perceive in these images versus what is the physical reality. And I'll give you an example of that. So right now, as you're looking at this slide, there should be a really weird thing happening where it looks like two of the images, specifically this one, let me just annotate that, specifically this image here and this image here appear as though they're moving, okay? Now, obviously, these are not GIFs. These are not like actual moving images. They're just plain old pictures. But when you look at these images, it looks like this one is kind of twirling around, you know, kind of swirling motion, okay? And that is just the physical, that is not the physical reality, but your perception of that image makes you think or makes you perceive that it is moving around. Okay, so that's basically, again, showing you the mismatch between what you perceive and between what is the actual physical reality, that it's just a plain old image. There's no movement in that to begin with. So that's basically just giving you a little idea into visual illusions, okay? Alrighty, so yep, we already looked at the Mueller-Lyer illusion. The Mueller-Lyer illusion was basically putting 3 lines in front of you, asking you which line is the longest, okay? Now, usually people, for some reason, when they look at the Mueller-Lyer illusion and you tell them that the second line is actually the same length as the other 2 lines, they won't believe you. They'll be like, no, I'm pretty sure that the second line is the same length as the other lines. But if you actually like align them together, put a ruler on it, and measure it like that, you'll notice that the lines are actually all the same length, okay? But for some reason, the Mueller-Lyer line, because of how it's kind of structured or shaped out, how the wings kind of like, not like are pointing outwards, it looks longer, okay? It gives the illusion of length, even though there is no actual length there. And it's just the same. So let's have a look at why the Mueller-Lyer illusion really tricks people consistently. Okay, so the Mueller-Lyer illusion, basically the definition, first of all, is that the Mueller-Lyer illusion is a well-known optical illusion in which 2 lines of the same length appear to be one of the different lengths. So obviously 2 lines of the same length appear to be one of the different lengths, okay? Essentially, they're all the same length, but one of the lines looks or appears to be longer. Now, for most people, like I said before, when this one's wings or this one's fins kind of point outwards, it gives you the illusion that it is longer than it actually is. So that is basically the kind of explanation behind why people are fooled to think that the second line is longer, whereas the arrows that point kind of inwards or like that kind of limit the extension of the line. They limit how much the lines can actually spread out. And so essentially that makes it look like, or it gives the illusion that it is shorter. Okay. Now, while your eyes might tell you that the line in the middle is the longest, the shafts of both lines are exactly the same length. So as we saw before, when you align them together and you actually measure out the lines themselves are actually the same length. But depending on whether the fin of the line or the arrow part of the line points outwards or inwards, your brain will think that it is either longer or shorter than it actually is. Okay, so that's why it works as an optical or visual illusion there. So there's some perspectives now. Obviously, we've understood the main reason why people believe that the second line is longer because of the arrows. If the arrow points outward, it makes the line look a bit longer than it actually is. But these are some perspectives, and we look at the biological perspective, we look at the psychological perspective, and the social perspective. The biological perspective suggests that when we look at the line that has the, and I'll just draw this up. When we look at a line that is pointing outwards, there's something with our eye movements that actually tricks our brains into thinking that that line is longer. Because if you think about it, when a line has arrows that point outwards, your eyes have to actually kind of stretch or move a little bit further to actually see the entire line, okay? As compared to if the line was just, as compared to if the line was just pointing inwards. Okay, so essentially what that means is that when you're looking at that illusion, you actually start to look a little bit more, your eyes have to move a little bit more in order to see the entire image of that line number 2, okay, because the lines are pointing outwards there. So your eyes have to kind of move and stretch a little bit more. And so that tricks your brain into thinking that the line is longer. And that's what we call as the eye movement theory, that your eyes have to move a little bit longer and a little bit further to see the entire image when the wings or when the arrows of that line are stretched outwards. The psychological perspective, and we call this the biological perspective because it's connected to how our body or our brain tricks us into believing this illusion. The psychological perspective basically looks at the role of our learning and our past experience in perceiving this illusion. And so a lot of us, especially in Western societies, we live in worlds which we call as carpentered worlds, okay? Carpentered worlds means that those lines are very similar to the architectural structure of like a house or like a room. So if we go back to those lines, Oops. Okay, if we were to take this line and turn it like horizontal, sorry, turn it vertical. So we take this line and we were to draw it in a, sorry, I'm not good at drawing, but if we were to draw this in a vertical way, a lot of our houses, a lot of our buildings, if you look at a corner of a room or a wall, like let's say this is your room, this is the corner, you can kind of draw it out in a sense that the wall kind of like starts like that at the top corner, and then it goes down and then it meets the bottom of the floor of your room. Okay, and you can draw an entire room out like that. But obviously I'm not very good at drawing. So essentially, because this line resembles the second line resembles the actual kind of walls in a house, or the actual kind of ceilings and how they connect to the floor and all that stuff. Basically, because of our past experience of living in houses that have these kinds of structures, we start to believe that that line is longer compared to the tail, compared to the line with the arrows that point like inwards. The social perspective emphasizes the role of social and cultural factors. So obviously for people who grow up in like non-carpentered or non-rectangular based houses like huts or igloos, or, you know, more circular kind of spherical structured places, they're not really going to fall for the Muller-Lyer illusion, because they're not really used to having that past experience of having walls that kind of have vertical lines and meet vertically. So they're going to basically believe that all the lines are the same length. They're not going to fall for the trick, which is the Muller-Lyer illusion. So that's the social perspective. It's looking at the role of your social upbringing, the cultural factors like where you live, what kind of tribes, or what kind of, you know, social structures you have, like houses and stuff like that. So the psychological and social perspectives are very similar, not exactly the same, but they are quite similar. Social perspective is more to do with your social environment as well. Like, do you grow up in a normal Western rectangular based house with rectangular walls and vertical lines, or do you grow up in a hut or an igloo or a more circular based kind of housing? So obviously, depending on which perspective you look at, there is a different explanation for why we fall for the Muller-Lyer illusion, okay? And most people that grow up in Western society, because of the way that our world is built, because we live in rectangular-based houses and rectangular-based structures, we do tend to fall for the Muller-Lyer illusion more than those people who live in huts or igloos or circular-based structures, okay? So that's the three perspectives on the Muller-Lyer illusion. The next illusion that we're looking at is called the Amos room illusion. So the Amos room illusion is basically this idea that it's just a room, and you might have actually seen this if you've ever gone to Melbourne Museum or Amaze and things. There's a little hole, there's like a peephole, and you just look through the peephole and, you know, it looks like a rectangular shape. So when you're looking through the peephole, see how this image here on the right-hand side with the two ladies here? When you look through the peephole, the actual size of the room or the actual shape of the room looks exactly like a peephole. Okay, it looks exactly like a rectangle. So this is what it looks like from the peephole perspective, okay, when I'm looking through the little peephole there. It doesn't look like any kind of irregular shaped room, it just looks like a rectangular shaped room. However, the actual structure of the room is that it's more of a trapezium shape. So the actual room, the shape of the room is like a trapezium, okay, that's the actual shape of the room. For some reason though, depending on which angle you're looking at from the peephole is actually placed in a way that when you look at this room, it looks exactly like a rectangular shape. It doesn't look like a trapezium at all. Okay, and so what happens is because of the irregular shape of the room, obviously a trapezium starts off pretty wide at the top and then it comes a little bit narrow towards the bottom. So the person that's standing on this side will actually start to look a little bit bigger depending on what side of the room they walk to, okay? And obviously if this girl comes back to this side of the room, she will start to look bigger. Okay, so obviously it's because of the irregular shape of the room where the trapezium's shape makes it kind of uneven on one side and a little bit more broadly shaped on the other side. Okay, so obviously with the left corner of the room, which is where this lady is standing here, what happens is that it's got a bit of a higher ceiling, okay? And because the ceiling is higher, the person actually looks a little bit smaller compared to the person on the right-hand side. Okay, but obviously, like I said, when you're looking through the peephole, the room just looks like a normal rectangle to you. So you just look at it like it was any kind of normal room in your house. And that's where the amusement of this entire illusion comes from, that it just looks like a normal room, and yet this person looks like a giant and this person looks like a really tiny person. Okay, but the only thing is the ceiling is actually a lot higher on this side of the room. And so it makes the person look smaller than they actually are. And it's a lot lower on this side of the room. So it makes the person look a lot bigger than they actually are. Okay, so that's the Ames room illusion. And yeah, that's basically all explained on this slide. But it's obviously always better to go back to the image and understand that the shape of the room is not what it seems. Okay, it looks like a rectangular room, but it's actually a trapezium. It's a trapezoidal shaped room. And everything I said about the ceiling being at an incline, the walls are not exactly like straight, all that stuff is all here as well. Now, obviously, when you're looking through the peephole, like I said before, the peephole is placed in the room to create the best viewing point and to remove any sense of distance. So it's angled at that specific way that when you look through this peephole, the room will look rectangular and both of those people will look like they're standing in the same room. Even though the room is the same, the shape of the room or the angle of the room at which they're standing is different, okay? But we don't realize that when we look through that peephole. Okay, yeah, so that's basically the main real important point. Listen, I'm not gonna be asking you, like in the SAC, we're not gonna ask you about the technical side of things. I'm not gonna ask you to outline the structure and shape of the Ames room in detail. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in how the Ames room works as a visual illusion. So the main kind of point I really want you guys to focus on is this particular point here. How does the illusion actually work? Okay, the illusion works because a person standing in one corner of the room appears to be a lot larger than the person standing in the opposite corner of the room. Okay, the room looks like a rectangle, but it's actually a trapezium. That's all you really need to know. I'm not going to ask you which side of the wall is higher than the other. That's just going to be too technical and too complicated. All right, cool. So the next thing we're looking at is called synesthesia. Synesthesia is basically the joining of the senses, okay? And there's a nice video that I'll just link to you guys or show you guys after this online session is over. So synesthesia is a joining of the senses. It's when one sense is activated, it also activates or stimulates another sense as well. So for example, if you say the word Wednesday to me, I might see the color blue. Or if you say the word tree to me, I might taste lettuce in my mouth. Okay, so it's like when one sense produces sensations in another modality. Okay, one sense produces another sense as to be activated as well. Now, synesthetic experiences are often driven by symbolic representation. So the person starts to symbolize the word tree with the word, with the taste of lettuce. Okay, it's not an association that has to be deliberately made, but some people are actually born with synesthesia or they develop synesthesia. Okay, it's not a normal thing to have synesthesia. In fact, it is quite rare. But yeah, a person with synesthesia might be able to see music. So when you play a certain song through earphones, they might be able to see an image coming up. When you say a certain word, like a really random word like Monday or Tuesday, they taste something in their mouth. Okay, so this is basically a joining or a combination of the senses. The senses start to work not in isolation of each other, but they start to interact and they start to actually cross paths. So synesthesia works even in the absence of external sensory input. So if I say the word Monday, I don't even have to be eating a burger. But when I say the word Monday, for some reason, the person tastes a burger in their mouth. Okay, so that's basically what synesthesia is about. Now, synesthesia works, and some psychologists believe that synesthesia works because the brains of patients are wired a little bit differently. So that sensory areas, for example, your primary visual cortex and your primary auditory cortex, they actually start to cross over and they start to activate one another. That's just one explanation for why synesthesia occurs. Okay, now a lot of famous people actually have synesthesia. One such example is Pharrell. So Pharrell actually mentions in an interview, and I think you can find that on YouTube as well, where when he listens to certain songs, you know, he sees images, and that he actually uses that as like inspiration when he creates music videos. So yeah, that's what synesthesia is about. It's joining of the senses. And there's a really good video of this, which I will show you the link to. It's on your course outline on the class page. Okay, so synesthesia is simply a joining of the senses where activation of one sense also activates another sense automatically. Okay, and it's obviously to do with things like symbolic representations. Okay, people just make representations between two different senses, essentially. Okay, so we're on to the last topic now for chapter 8, and this is a really easy topic. It's looking at judgment of flavors. This is connected to taste perception. So before we go on to the next few slides, we just have to be able to define what is flavor. Flavor is a perceptual experience. It's something you feel. It's something you experience perceptually from a you know, perceptive point of view. And flavor is basically the experience that we get when we produce a combination, when we are exposed to a combination of both taste of a food as well as other sensations. Okay, so remember in chapter 7, when we looked at taste perceptions, we simply looked at taste as a chemical reaction that occurs when any substance, you know, basically falls onto your tongue, and obviously your taste buds start to make sense of that. But flavor is a little bit different. You don't have to taste a food to understand its flavor. Okay, so if my mum is making something in the kitchen, she's cooking something, I will be able to smell that, and I'll be able to judge, okay, is she making something sweet? Is she making something savory? If I see you eating a packet of chips, I will be able to tell you that, okay, those chips are definitely not chewy. They should be crispy. They should be crunchy. Okay, I should be able to give you that understanding of texture. So I don't have to personally eat something in order to judge the flavor of that food. Okay, so that's essentially what flavor is. And a lot of the time we you know, we judge flavor using smell. So if someone gives you, you know, a lolly or a chocolate, you might, you know, smell it before you eat it. And if it smells like strawberry, then you know it's got a strawberry filling or it's strawberry flavored. All right, so we use smell a lot to judge what flavors are. So the first thing I want to do before we look at perceptual state, now I want you to look at these 3 images. And when you look at these 3 images, just tell me what first comes to your mind. It could be any information about what flavor of drink we're looking at or what flavor of lollipop. It could be information about what kind of texture you get when you eat these things. So just, I'll give you guys a few seconds now just to think about that. Okay, so this is basically all to do with our perceptual set. Okay, perceptual set is our expectation. So in the first picture here, when you look at this, this doesn't have any name of what brand this could be or any labeling, but because of our past experience of seeing this can for so many years, it's a globally recognized brand. Even if we don't write the word Coca-Cola on this, we know that this is a can of Coke. Okay, we don't need further explanation or further evidence. We just know that that color of red and that little twirly kind of line on that can makes it a can of Coke, and it cannot be any other brand. Okay, that's our perceptual set. That's us drawing on our past experiences of having seen this can before and knowing that this is a can of Coke. When I see these chips, you know, I would probably guess that these chips are crispy. Okay, I'm going to think about the texture as being crunchy. I'm not going to think that these chips are chewy or soft or gooey. Okay, I don't associate these textures with a bowl of chips. These just look like a nice bowl of chips that are crispy and that look quite fresh. The third image here is an image of a red lollipop. Okay, when you look at this image, you would guess that the lollipop is probably strawberry flavored or cherry flavored or maybe raspberry flavored. If I told you that, hey, this lollipop is actually grape flavored or blueberry flavored, you'd be like, what? But it's red. How does that work? So certain things, when we look at these images, if someone gives you a red lollipop and your favorite flavor is strawberry, you're like, yes, it's red, it's strawberry. But when you eat that lollipop and it tastes like grape, you're like, ew, what is this? Like, this is not what I expected. So a lot of the time when we make judgments of taste and judgments of flavor, we actually draw on our past experiences, okay? Knowing that this is a can of Coke, knowing that red lollipops are always strawberry or cherry or raspberry, knowing that chips are always crunchy. If I were to give you a bowl of chips and those chips ended up being chewy or gooey or dry or stale, you would be disappointed because your brain expected something else. So again, in the same way that visual distortions or distortions of perception are about expectations versus reality, when we look at flavors, it's always about expectations versus reality as well. If I gave you that can of Coke and it was flat, it wasn't fizzy, you would be disappointed. Okay, so we have certain expectations, and these are all to do with our perceptual set. So we judge flavors in food based on our perceptual set, and that is basically to do with what we expect the food to look like, taste like, or feel like, okay, based on our past experience. So when we say look like, that's the example of the Coca-Cola, okay? If somebody were to give you a blue color can with a little red logo, you might automatically guess that that is Pepsi. Okay, if someone were to give you a little orange can with a little picture of an orange fruit on it, you would guess that that's Fanta. Okay, so obviously depending on our past expectations, we will make judgments accordingly. Okay, if you give a can of Coke to a child who's lived in a country where Coke was never marketed, was never promoted, was never a thing, that child would not have any idea about what that can of Coke was because they just haven't been exposed to it. So again, it's all based on our past experience or our predetermined ideas of what that food should be. So look like is obviously the Coca-Cola example. Taste like is the chips. So if I gave you a bowl of chips and they weren't really dry or not like crispy, you would be disappointed and you would judge the taste of the chips as being quite bad, even though the chips have exactly the same ingredients. Feel like, again, is related to texture. So if I gave you, a can of Coke and it was flat, you would be disappointed because obviously it's not fizzy and it doesn't have that kind of zing that a normal can of Coke would have. Okay, same thing if someone were to give you a yellow colored soft drink, you might automatically expect to taste lemon type flavors. Okay, so this perceptual set is all about our expectations. Okay, how our expectations cause us to sometimes be disappointed when it comes to food, okay? Because sometimes we do build up our expectations when it comes to food and the flavor or the taste of certain foods. Alrighty, so on the note of that lemon drink example, I want you guys to look at these two examples of what we assume should be lemonade. And I want you to make a judgment now out of 10. I want you to rate both of these lemonades out of 10 and yeah, just on your own, just decide which one you think looks tastier. Okay, which one you would prefer to drink. And I'll make a judgment too. Okay, so personally, I think the one on the right looks good. Okay, so I would probably give this a 9 out of 10. I could probably give it a 10 out of 10, to be honest. I'm just being mean. Okay, I'll give it a 9 out of 10 though. And honestly, I didn't think this one was appetizing at all. I thought the cookies in the background were appetizing, but the actual lemonade in the first picture doesn't look appetizing at all. It looks like one of those herbal drinks my mum would make or something. So I'm probably going to give it, I don't know, probably like a 3 out of 10. It's got mint in it, so that's the saving grace for the lemonade, the mint. Okay, so those are our two examples. Now, and we're gonna explain the reason for why I thought this lemonade on the right-hand side looked better. And I don't know what you guys think, but I'm pretty sure most of you thought this lemonade on the right-hand side looked better as well. Okay, so essentially what we're trying to learn from this slide here is this understanding about color intensity. Okay, and if we go back to the slide here, the main reason I thought this lemonade on the right-hand side was nicer was because the yellow was a lot more intense and it looks like it's more lemony or it's more like lemon flavored compared to this one on the right, which is a lot, compared to this one on the left, sorry, which is a lot more paler in color, doesn't look very appealing or appetizing. It's very pale colored, okay, very dull looking, whereas this one is a lot more yellow, a lot more vibrant. It's reminiscent of a typical delicious lemonade that a kid might sell in those cartoons, okay? So essentially, that's why I thought that the one on the right-hand side was better. The lemonade on the right-hand side had better color intensity. And you wouldn't always realize this, but we actually emphasize color intensity a lot when choosing foods. Okay, if you've ever gone to sorry, not Safeway, it's called Woolworths. Okay, it's called Woolworths now. So yeah, if you've ever gone to Woolworths or you've gone to Coles, obviously, you know, you always pick out the fruit, or your parents would always pick out the fruit that looks a lot more colorful. Okay, whenever I go to Coles and I see an apple that looks like this, I'm like, no way, I'm not buying that. I need to buy the one that's nice and red. Okay, they might taste exactly the same. They might not even taste different. In fact, this one might even taste sweeter in some instances. But for some reason, we just want to choose the one that looks a lot brighter and a lot more redder in color. So generally the rule is that if a food has a higher color intensity, so it's a lot more darker or it's more contrasted in color, we believe that it's likely to have more flavor. Okay, so a very intensely yellow colored drink might be seen as having more of a lemon flavor than one that's a little bit more pale or lightly yellowed in color. Okay, so that's the example from the previous slide there. Now, coloring of food particularly affects how young children perceive the flavor of the food. And this is why all these like gummy lollies, all these like colorful lolly mixes, all these kind of stuff are really appealing for young children because they are very intensely colored. And whenever you give, whenever children see this in the store, it automatically catches their attention. And even if those gummy lollies taste really bad or they don't taste that good, the children are just drawn in by the color of that. Okay, even with us, you know, even with like older children, with teenagers, with adults, we tend to enjoy foods that are colorful. In fact, if you've ever looked at, you know, food tags on Instagram or any social media, you would realize that people love to post pictures of foods that are colorful, okay, like a rainbow, a plate of a rainbow of colored foods. So essentially what that means is that we are drawn, even before we eat the food, we are drawn by the color of the food, okay? So obviously color intensity plays a big role in flavor. And there's this like saying that my mum says that like often it's like our eyes that eat before our, sorry, wait, I can't translate it. It's like our eyes that eat the food before we actually eat the food. So before we actually decide that we want to eat a food, we're drawn in by how the food looks, by how colorful it is, by how vibrant it is. Okay, so essentially color intensity is about that idea as well. Okay, and the last thing that we're looking at for today is texture, and this will basically finish up chapter 8 for us. So texture is about how you feel, okay? When you put the food into your mouth, how does that food actually, or how does that drink actually feel? What is its texture like, okay? What is the sensory experience essentially of eating that food, okay? So it's all about how that food feels or how that drink feels once it goes into your mouth. So this texture does contribute to how we perceive taste along with the other senses. So how the food smells, how the food tastes, how the food looks. For example, if I have a jug of milk and the milk looks really white in color, but I smell it and it smells off, I'm not going to even bother to drink that because I know that it's off. Okay, if I see a plate of chips and I just have a little smell of it, but it doesn't smell like the flavors like all there, I'm not going to eat that. Okay, so obviously how we smell food, how we taste food, and how food looks all determine the flavor of that food. And texture is also a big influencer of whether we will eat a food or not. Okay, food can have various textures, and these are just some examples. Again, this is very common sense. You guys already are probably familiar with this. So food can be crispy, crunchy, smooth, rough, grainy, chewy, soft, hard, lumpy, runny, bubbly, fizzy, dry, moist, juicy, rich, etc. There's so many textures. You don't need to know all of these. This is not something you've got to memorize. But if I ever ask you to, for example, give one example of a texture of food, you can just say crunchy or smooth or whatever. Okay, now how food is prepared or cooked can change its texture and taste. So apples usually start off crunchy if you look at the fruit, but if you put them in a blender and puree them for like a little baby to eat, they will become really soft and gooey. If you juice them up in a juicer, they will become obviously liquid in texture. If you are sauteing some apples with some brown sugar to make apple pie, they'll become quite soft. They'll no longer be, you know, crispy. So yeah, it depends. How you prepare a food will change its texture. Now, the longer a food remains in your mouth and the more you chew it, the greater the flavor that is released. And so you might have heard about, you know, certain things that say that you got to chew your food like 20 times or something to get the best taste and the best flavor and the nutrients and everything out of it. It's kind of true. The more that you chew a food, the greater the flavor will be released, because obviously you're continuously breaking down the structure of that food. And each time you break it down, those chemical reactions are intensified a bit more. Now, our preferred textures are influenced by past experience and perceptual set. So if you're someone who really grew up eating a lot of crispy, crunchy kind of foods, you would really love the idea of having a bag of chips while you watch a movie. If you're someone who's not so much into crunchy, but you're more into like soft foods, you might prefer to have like popcorn, okay? Because popcorn is not as crunchy as a packet of potato chips. If you're someone who really loves smoothies, you might really like to have, you know, liquid-based foods or lumpy-based foods, okay? If you're someone who's grown up on soft drink, you might really enjoy having fizzy drinks all the time. So it really depends on your past experience and your perceptual set, which is your expectations as well. Again, our expectations, again, are influenced by our past experiences, yeah, as well, okay? So how we grow up, what kind of food we have growing up, any bad, if you ate a food when you were young and you developed food poisoning because of that, you would probably never want to touch that food again, okay? We call that a taste aversion. So yeah, that's basically how texture influences our understanding of food. And with that, we are basically done with chapter 8.